Hello, welcome to this episode of Quake. Now, I know what you're thinking. God, that's a fine t-shirt you've got on today. And I'd be like, yeah, I know. Let me tell you about it. In fact, let me make a video about it and tell you why. So here we go. This is what it is. Simple, radical, spiritual. Let's go. Now, this is, I haven't made it myself. This is a t-shirt which actually you can get for yourself as well, should you so wish, in a variety of different colours. This is the part of the advertising ahead of Quaker Week, which is going on the last week of August, last week of September, culminating in World Quaker Day on the 1st of October. So I'll put the link below. So if you're interested in getting your own, there's a variety of colours. And yeah, supporting Quaker Week and getting people talking about Quakerism. So I really like that they're focusing on these three things. I think if I had to describe Quakerism in 3 words, I think these are certainly 3 words that I probably would choose. And I think they say something very important about Quakers throughout the Quaker world and throughout Quaker history as well. So I'm just going to spend some time on each one of these 3 words, talking about why I think they're important for Quakerism, why I think they're important for the Quake world and community, for the world in general, and also maybe why they've always been important for Quakerism. This isn't just 3 words we decided to throw around for this year 2023 only. This has been something which has been a long-standing Quaker tradition ever since it began. So I'll go in order, might as well. Let's start with simple. I think simple should be first because it in some ways is the most important in many ways because it's actually the only one of those three which is actually a testimony in of itself. So we have a testimony for simplicity, and that can obviously take a lot of different angles, and people have certainly taken that in different ways throughout the Quaker period, throughout the Quaker world. It's one of the testimonies that I'm trying to do more myself with. I think it's a good one because it's one that I can actively do something about. You know, it's something that I can personally make changes for the better towards, and I quite like that. So what does it mean? Well, I think Quakers are all about simplicity in many ways. So you could look at a Quaker meeting for worship, for example. That is highly simple when you compare it to even probably your most basic Protestant uh, church services. And by basic, I mean where they don't have lots of traditions and bells and smells and all that kind of thing. A very pulled back Protestant church service. Even in comparison to that, a Quaker meeting for worship still looks way more simple. The idea is that there is no distraction between you and uh, ministry from the inner light. That you know you're not being distracted by what a pastor is telling you to think. You're not being distracted by standing up, sitting down, singing, um, taking bread and wine. It is all about that communion with the divine personally, but also as a community as well. And everyone's doing the same thing, and everyone on that level is doing is completely equal. There's no hierarchy amongst different people. There's a clerk who ends the meeting and is kind of leading it, but they don't have any hierarchical role, and it's literally you need someone to tell you when the meeting's ended. Otherwise, it could go on just like in early Quakerism for hours. So the meeting for worship is certainly very simple. You don't need to know anything before you go. Quite often, and it's lovely when it happens, you get people who come in and they say, I was just walking by and I thought, why not? And I love that. But if they gave ministry, that's just it. That would be perfectly accepted, perfectly welcome. And I think that's really great because anyone can do it. Even if you've literally just decided that day to go, having no experience, you can participate to the highest level of Quaker meeting for worship because it's so simple and no one is excluded. So it's not like some church services where you're not allowed to take communion if you're not part of the church or something like that. Everyone can take part fully, and it's simple to do. Throughout its history, so Quakers have often tried to be simple in many ways. So a common way was in language. They at the time refused to use the distinction between um, the two forms of you, the more formal version of you, and the more informal word for you. So you is actually formal. Thee or thou was the informal. They use thou and thee for everyone, to make it nice and simple, everyone on the same equal footing, which got them in a lot of trouble. They didn't take their hats off or do anything to try and create any distinctions between others. They were all very, just try to live a simple life, not try to fill it with all these circumlocutions and honorings that they felt unnecessary. They wore very simple clothing right from the well, not right from the very beginning, but they started to wear simple colors, so mostly gray, black. They weren't trying to make themselves any more important than they already were. They didn't think that was necessary, and that carried on, and along with the thou and thee, which was called plain speech, so plain dress and plain speech, that lasted pretty much into the 1800s, and that fell away not because we decided we didn't want to be simple anymore, but because actually by wearing the traditional Quaker garb and with the hat and all that sort of stuff, um, and using thou and thee actually became anachronous with the times. No one was using thou and thee. It wasn't having the same impact. So it wasn't actually being simple. It was being quite complicated. So they got rid of it. Quite early on as well, Quakers have been looking to be simple by their effect on the environment. And obviously, this is massive today, but even going back to a very famous Quaker called John Woolman, who was very radical. More on that later, but he was in the 1700s, and he was a huge abolitionist against slavery, but wanted to try and make sure that he was not taking more than he needed. So he was a vegetarian, for example. Benjamin Lay, another very famous Quaker, arguably one of the first abolitionists, he was a vegetarian as well, or tried to remove his impact on the environment from, or reduce his impact on the environment. And obviously today this is huge. Quakers are often campaigning for um, better climate change, climate policies, green policies around the world, but certainly in England. And I know loads of Quakers think very deeply about where their food comes from and where their clothes come from, whether their clothes are to, whether what they're wearing is to up their own egos or whether it's to be comfortable or to do the function of what clothes are meant to do. One thing that I'm really trying to do, which might not sound it when I'm doing these videos, but what I'm trying to do with simplicity is I'm trying to make sure that I talk succinctly and that I speak my mind as often as I can, as kindly as I can. So not saying more than I need to, making my point clearly, making my views known, and leave it at that. Not trying to cover things up or lie or use maybe even flowery language. Just make it very clear because I think people respect that. I think people uh, like to know that what you're saying is true. In the past as well, that was quite important. Quakers were quite instrumental in introducing fixed prices for items at shops. So people would go in the past to Quaker shops or Quaker shops run by Quakers because they knew they would get the same price. As everyone would get the same price. Whereas for quite a long time in history, there was a certain amount of bartering. So, oh well, or haggling. Oh well, we'll start off at 2 shillings, and oh no, 2 shillings, that's outrageous, and so on. Whereas a Quaker would say, no, the price for this is however many, and that's the price. I'm not changing it. And the same would be for someone with no haggling experience to the top haggler in town. The price would be the same, and people really respected that. So let's move on to radical. Excellent. Well, Quakers are very radical. They've always have been very radical. They have got themselves into trouble a lot for speaking truth to power and standing up for their testimonies, stand up for what they believe the inner light is asking them to do. So, as I mentioned earlier, the whole idea of simplicity and not only honoring God and not honoring kings and archbishops and judges, that was highly radical and subversive. And Quakers spent a lot of time in jail for it because they felt it was wrong. If they felt it was idolatry to pay this sort of homage to a man who's just a man, for no reason apart from the fact that who he was born the son of, or even his education. So the Quakers, right from the very beginning, were against priests or paid priests in their meeting because they didn't think an education or making it into an occupation was what was required for someone to be true to the leadings of the inner light. Every part of the Quaker meeting or meeting for worship was highly radical. That there were no Lord's Supper, that there was no baptism, that they could meet in people's houses at any time. These things were not done, and again, this is why they got into a lot of trouble. And the Quakers used when they were arrested and taken to court, they used this as a stage in order to say what they believed succinctly and clearly. And uh, they were radicals. They were not polite, meek people all the time. There is that element to Quakerism, but there's also that element of the Quakerism with when they think something is wrong, they will say so, and they will act with peacefully, but they will make it known that they don't agree. So Quakers have often found themselves on the forefront of a lot of causes for social justice. So right back to slavery, trying to abolish slavery, they were on the forefront of that. Prison reform, making prisons not places where people died in because of dysentery and disease. Going ahead to looking at equality based on race, equality based on gender, equality based on sexual orientation, the idea of being always on the forefront of justice and campaigning actively for that is something that Quakers have always done. And that has to be radical because, if you consider the culture always saying, well, it's actually okay that this exists, maybe it's not great. Quakers say, no, this is not okay, and we're going to do something about it. So at the moment, there are there are climate protests, there are campaigns for better inclusion of the trans community. There are campaigns for peace in Ukraine and things like that, which is still radical when considering, the government in the UK aren't necessarily there yet. So then finally, but not leastly, we'll move on to spiritual. Now, I think this is the bedrock of the other two. Like the other two would not be there if Quakers were not intensely spiritual. Now we've got to be I think we've got to be broad with our use of that word. Not all Quakers are Christian. Not all Quakers are uh, necessarily religious in that way at all. So we would have atheist and non-theist Quakers, but so a very broad understanding of the word spiritual, that there is something more than just human experience, that there's this extra experience. How that looks and how people describe that varies from Quaker to Quaker, but it is spiritual in that sense. So with early Quakers, they generally believed that Jesus was in their meetings. They believed that Jesus was as much there as the next person and that he was ministering to them both inwardly and prompting them to lead others. All our testimonies for simplicity, truth, equality, peace, all these testimonies come from a deep spiritual core. We don't have these testimonies just because they're nice things to do, although they are. That we don't have these testimonies because these testimonies of simplicity, truth, equality, peace, any group could have. They didn't even have to be spiritual to have them. But we have these testimonies because we are spiritual people. So they have spiritual roots. Simplicity originally came from the idea that everyone was equal before God, and no man or woman has the right to be uh, put on a pedestal for no apparent reason, apart from those reasons made by the world. Everyone was loved, and everyone was cherished, and everyone had this access to the divine. Truth is spiritual because saying truth to power can sometimes require an immense amount of courage, which you might not be able to do completely by yourself if you weren't connected to a spiritual center. Quality also, you have to, if we believe that there is that of God in everyone. What we mean by that, as I said, can change from Quaker to Quaker, but we believe that everyone has this connection to this extra personal experience. And because we believe that, we believe in equality on a social level, on a political level. We can't, and in our meetings as well. But that underpinning is based on our understanding that everyone has this access to this experience, this seed, this inner light. And finally, peace, arguably our oldest testimony, is highly spiritual as well, because the early Quakers, when this started, said quite clearly, we do not believe that the teachings of Jesus are in line with any form of war. And so, yes, we're against war, but we're against war because of our testimony of equality as well. We don't believe that why do we have the say to take another person's life in any way? And that it's only when we're at peace with each other or coming to peace with each other that we can meet on this spiritual level, where we can come together as a spiritual community. If there's friction, we can't do that. So we have to work together in order to create a peaceable community, because that way we can come together. Together we can experience the inner light. Together we can uphold each other and create a better society. So I'm really happy with both with the T-shirt, but also I'm really happy that these three words were chosen. I think they're fantastic and are good opening conversations with anyone wanting, even if someone just asked me on the street, why you got that? I would happily talk about that. It starts conversations in ways which I think are quite easy for people to get into. We're not putting out a vast doctrines, not that there are any of Quakerism, but we're not saying when it's not starting out with very complicated words. These are words everyone would understand, but would allow us to talk about it in a Quaker context. So I will be doing some videos for Quaker Week. I haven't decided quite how that's going to work yet, but do get involved if you can. Please just spread the word. Say it's Quaker Week. On Quaker Day, there's stuff going on looking at the word Ubuntu, which is a Swahili word, I believe. Looking at, I'm still working out what that means, but I will work out what it means, and I will do a video on it. And that's going on Quaker Day. And obviously, when my videos come out, have a look at that as well. But yes, so can we be, as we lead up to Quaker Week, more simple, more radical, and more spiritual? See you next time. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, please do click on the thumbs up and the subscribe button to get more videos about Quakerism in the UK today. It really does help, and thanks once again.